The following is a conversation between Perla Ni, founder and CEO of Great Nonprofits, and Denver Frederick, host of The Business of Giving on AM 970 The Answer in New York City.
Would you go away on summer vacation to a spot you've never been before without checking TripAdvisor or some other comparable site? And while you were there, would you just wander into any old restaurant for dinner before looking at the Yelp reviews on your phone? Or buy a new propane gas grill without reading customer reviews online to see what others had to say about it? Well, the answer to all of these is of course not. So does it make any sense to support a charity without reading a review from those who have been helped by it and others who are involved in some capacity? Well, my next guest didn't think so either. And that is why she started Great Nonprofits. And it is a great pleasure for me to welcome to the show Perla Ni, the founder and CEO of Great Nonprofits. Good evening, Perla, and thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
So the year is 2005, and you are the publisher of the Stanford Social Innovation Review, one of the premier publications in the philanthropic and nonprofit management world, and Hurricane Katrina strikes. So people come to you and ask where can they contribute to make the most meaningful difference? Because after all, who's going to know any better than you? What do you tell them?
And that was the question of the day. Many of my friends and my family told me they wanted to contribute and really make an impact by giving to local nonprofits. And could I recommend some local nonprofits in New Orleans or Biloxi, Mississippi that they could give to? And I sat there really puzzled. Here I was at Stanford, one of the most wonderful publications in the country, focused on nonprofit management. But I did not know about local nonprofits in that area. And so one of my journalist friends went out there to volunteer. And when he came back, he told me of several fantastic local nonprofits that he had seen helping people get medical care, taking people to get registered for emergency housing. And he said these are organizations that often, are not well known to the world. And so that really inspired me to create Great Nonprofits, which is a way for folks to share experiences about nonprofits that they have experienced with as volunteers, as donors, as clients that have been helped by the nonprofit.
How did the idea of beneficiary feedback, those are the people who've been helped by these nonprofits, how did that crystallize in your mind to build an organization around that?
Well, I think, as a journalist, you want to interview people who have experienced the impact of a nonprofit firsthand. So often, I think, we look to experts and, to ask them, who are the best nonprofits out there? And in many cases, the experts are really the people who are served by the nonprofit. They can tell you, is this organization, their offices are open at a convenient time for me. They had the food that was accessible to me. They had tutors available for my family. They treated me with respect and dignity. They helped, promote this movement that I'm a part of. They're furthering this legislation, and I've seen them, work hard at, writing letters to legislators. So there's so many amazing organizations in this country, and nonprofits, famously have tiny marketing budgets, and they don't have budgets for advertising. So it's really the stories of the people from the community that can help these nonprofits gain visibility and recognition.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've had this customer satisfaction movement in this country, which really started with the consumer rights movement that Kennedy started in the 1960s. But for some reason, it has never gotten to the nonprofit sector where we've made this part of who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for the nonprofit sector, they really have a variety of different customers in that they've got the clients that they serve, they've got the volunteers who come and, pack the grocery bags, chop the food at the food pantry, and then they've got the donors who, in many cases, are also members of that community. It's remarkable, but many donors used to be former clients. Many donors are also volunteers. And of course, you have many donors who also, volunteer in pro bono ways with their skills and their time. So it's a whole community of folks who really can see the impact of a nonprofit.
So, getting this information from beneficiaries and others that you've just mentioned, you recognize that's going to be extremely useful to donors and to nonprofits themselves. but you need to create a framework or a mechanism to make this work in an efficient and effective manner. What was your thinking about this, and how did you go about trying to build an infrastructure?
Yeah, I think especially in these days of everyone wanting to have a voice, everyone having an opinion, everyone using, different mechanisms for social media and writing down their opinions and sharing with each other, the natural place I was looking at, are there any technology platforms that we can create to create this kind of community of people who really want to surface the organizations that are doing a really good job in their community. To date, we have now over 260,000 submissions from across the country, about over 33,000 nonprofits, and these are nonprofits that range from small grassroots organizations to national organizations to the food pantries in your local city or town. And so it's really remarkable how open people have been with their hearts in contributing these stories about nonprofits in their local areas.
Have you been able to measure the impact that these reviews have on a particular nonprofit, let's say as far as their fundraising is concerned? Do they have an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. We did a survey, and 9 out of 10 donors say that the stories help them better understand the work of the nonprofit, and 8 out of 10 say that the stories influence their decision whether or not to donate to that organization. Yeah. And, I think, also the stories are very inspirational, at least to me. I read them every day. And
Give us one or two.
Well, if you look at here in the New York area, there's an organization called Philanthropy, which does advocacy rights in Harlem. And you read the stories about the people who had been living in these decrepit apartments infested with rats, with wires falling down from the ceiling, with inadequate plumbing, and these tenants who've been, complaining for years to their landlords and not getting anywhere. And then this organization, Philanthropy, started by a former banker who herself, had an issue with her landlord not keeping up her apartment. She started this organization that brings together all these residents and brings their voices together. And in many cases, they have won lawsuits against the landlords and have been able to get their apartments fixed as a result. So, it's a small local organization, but it's just one of the examples where, when you bring the stories of people together, the collective voice really has an impact.
I bet it does. So these reviews, we talk about how they can impact the donors, but do they also impact the nonprofits? And by that I mean, do they regularly check these out to see what their beneficiaries are saying about the work they're doing? And if a consistent theme in these reviews becomes apparent, they actually might alter the kind of program they're giving?
Yeah. For the nonprofits, there's two effects of these stories. One is that they really help the nonprofits increase their staff morale. People don't often realize this, but every day it's challenging working at many of these nonprofits because the progress is slow. It's difficult to create long-term sustainable change.
Sure.
You're changing people's behaviors. You're dealing with very complicated personal issues amongst the clients that you serve. You have to deal with legislators. You're working on a tiny shoestring budget.
That's exactly right.
And so morale is often low at these nonprofits. And then all of a sudden you have a story of someone who came in 10 years ago and got emergency food from this food pantry, and now 10 years later, that person is doing well, has a job, is working as a sysadmin, and he says, I wouldn't be here today without that food. That one time that I came into the pantry for food because I totally ran out of money. So when the staff of these nonprofits, they read about, wow, this is what happened to that person who came in 10 years ago. I didn't know. It really helps them to understand the long-term impact of the work that they sometimes, don't see on a day-to-day basis. The second effect, of course, is, when they do see, suggestions for improvement, they will go ahead and listen to that feedback. And that's also really important for us in that they listen and they care about the stories from their community, and it's an effective way to gather that kind of feedback.
Yeah, and I would think also if it's on your site sometimes, it's a little bit easier for people to do that there as opposed directly on the side of the nonprofit that may have helped them. You're always looking to try to take the information you collect here to scale, because otherwise people would have to come to great nonprofits to read it. Have you been able to kind of conceive of a way that you could disseminate it on a broader basis?
Yeah, we're really excited to have partners such as Global Giving, GuideStar, Foundant, a number of other websites and software companies that use our API to distribute the content to their customers. So over 20 million folks actually see the Great Nonprofits content in addition to our own website.
That's just a great combination, because in some of those you're getting some real hard financial data and impact data, and then when you get it with the human voice, it probably is a great combination for people to make the most informed decision when the two of them are together like that.
Yeah, I think you need both the heart and the head. I think giving is one of those. It's an art and a science.
Let me talk to you a little bit about beneficiary feedback some more. We had David Bonbright on the show earlier this year. He's from Keystone Accountability, and as you know, beneficiary feedback, or as they call it, constituent voice, is their whole thing. And we got into a conversation about courtesy bias, and that is when somebody has just been helped by a nonprofit organization, they may be a little bit more inclined to say nice things about it than they otherwise might. And we actually looked at an example where some folks had just been released from prison and were in a job training program, and when he dug a little bit deeper with them and looking at the reviews, they told him pretty much, well, really, they couldn't see any upside of giving a critical review. So there is that, what they call courtesy bias. I know that you're aware of this, and you've tried to take some provisions to try to take account for it. What have you done?
Well, courtesy bias is a phenomenon seen across any kind of site that has user-generated content. On the internet, people prefer to talk about happier things rather than negative things. And you see this on Facebook. It's predominantly happy news about here's my pet, here's my birthday, here's my wedding celebration, here's our vacation.
Well, I think they're branding themselves as well. They're trying to tell everybody that they're awesome.
Yeah. So I don't think it's unique that there is some degree of probably a positivity bias in anything that people share on the internet. But I would say that what is remarkable to us is when you read these stories, you are reading what appears to us to be very authentic voices from these marginalized communities who otherwise would never be heard. For instance, you can go on our site and you can read a story from a low-income African-American girl and her experience with an after-school tutoring program. And it's raw. It's not edited by us. It is a long story, and you can see her talk about the positives as well as some of the slight drawbacks of the nonprofit and their space constraints that they have at this after-school tutoring program. But it's, especially in this day and age when we feel like the internet should be a vehicle for bringing us together, this is one example in which you can imagine yourself being this person from a very different walk of life than you.
Sticking with that point, Perla, about trying to get information from underserved low-income communities, it can be tough. They move very often sometimes. Often there are language barriers. And sometimes when people come into their neighborhood with a clipboard to take a survey, they're not exactly welcoming. And one of the things you've done to address this is launch an initiative called Citizen Insights. What is it and how does it work?
Thanks. That's a really great question. Citizen Insights is our initiative to really get boots on the street, to really understand what's going on in some of the poorest neighborhoods in this country. So we've worked in Latino communities in South Los Angeles, in San Jose. We worked with African American communities in Pennsylvania. It is really looking at how can we create a bridge and a dialogue with some of the most poorest communities and neighborhoods in which 60% or more of the people rely on public transportation to get to where they are. And these are not people who live in New York City. So, being in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and relying on public transportation is an indicator of pretty low income. And what we do is we use text messaging to do surveys in these communities because everyone now these days have a phone.
That's right.
And everyone knows how to text. And unlike mailing addresses where low-income people, they tend to move pretty frequently or stay at their family's house or be moving to another city or another neighborhood for a job or, staying at a friend's couch for a couple of weeks, they have their phone with them. And so the phone is an excellent way to be able to get timely and honest feedback from low-income residents. So we've been really excited to have done projects funded by, the Heinz Endowments, the Grable Foundation, the California Endowment, California Wellness Foundations, to really go into some of these underserved communities and understand what is the access to job training opportunities, what is their access to health care, what is their access to after-school educational activities for their kids.
The phone is a game changer, and I'd be curious as to how you see technology changing the very nature of civic engagement, not only among the millennials, but I guess we also have to probably include Generation Z in these conversations now, and I think those would be people who were born between the mid-1990s and the mid-2000s. What have you observed in this regard?
I think for younger people, they have a deep need to be affiliated with a group, to be part of a group. And, I think that's true for all of us to some extent, but especially for younger folks, they are looking for a way to make a difference while being part of a group. And so some of the more exciting things that we've seen are the rise of youth philanthropy groups, so kind of young people getting together to make decisions about giving in their communities. And so increasingly we see community foundations that have junior boards. So kids in high school volunteer and are apply to be on this junior board, and then they get to sit around the table and talk about, what are the youth organizations in our community that are deserving of funding. And it's a great way for young people to do things together, fundraise together, make giving decisions together, and learn about their community together.
Yeah, and the operative word there obviously is together.
Yes, yes.
So, one of the wonderful things you do on your website is you take all this information and you aggregate it and you put it together and index it beautifully in something called the Great Nonprofits Top Rated Awards. Tell us about that.
Yeah, these are the People's Choice Awards. These are nonprofits that have had tremendous positive stories by their communities. So we call them top rated because they are rated by people in their community. And this is, bottom up awards to recognize those organizations that are really deeply making an impact in their community.
Yeah. And I would imagine that it's probably the smaller organizations that really benefit from a site like Great Nonprofits as opposed to those big, larger international and national organizations.
We have a huge range. The Federation of American College Women have fantastic stories about the impact that they have made, and they're a national organization. And yes, we have really small grassroots organization on our site as well that you can read kind of the stories and the testimonials of their volunteers and the clients that they helped.
I know, Perla, you really understand nonprofits, and in part it's because your family arrived in this country with about $100, and you had to rely on a lot of nonprofits for things such as your dentistry and a whole bunch of other things as well. How has that experience informed the work you have done both at the Stanford Social Innovation Review and now at Great Nonprofits?
I think people forget that nonprofits are all around us. In Central Park, it's, the carriage rides and the cleaning is run by a nonprofit. The national parks, if you're traveling to Yosemite this summer, many of the paths, the brand new paths at Yosemite, were paid for by a nonprofit group that fundraised to do that maintenance. And so many of the services out there available to low-income people are provided now by nonprofits, not government. So when I was, growing up, just that experience of, when I look back at my childhood photos, in every photo I look at my outfit. In that outfit, those jeans, that T-shirt, they were donated to a nonprofit. My family never could afford to buy new clothes, and the bicycle in that picture, again, was a used bicycle that was donated to a nonprofit. And so I personally have witnessed and have experienced what a difference nonprofits can make for the lives of ordinary people. And it's important to know, even if we're, now I'm middle class and, I don't rely on those services anymore, to really understand what a huge role those nonprofits play in creating a safety net for people in our community, as well as really contributing to the arts and culture and civil society that we have that we often take for granted until, when we start seeing these divisions in our communities and we wonder what happened, how come people are not talking to each other, and
Yeah.
and then you realize, wow, we really need to repair our communities and continue to volunteer, continue to go to community events, talk to our neighbors, do all those things that we used to do to have relationships with our fellow human beings.
What's your take on just your view of the role that philanthropy plays in communities and how they work together and how indispensable and intersected they are? To give us a little sense of your observations on that.
Yeah, so a lot of, some people might think that the act of giving is, my parting with my money, my giving, my losing my money and giving it to someone else. I actually think that the act of giving is an act of creating a relationship with other people in your community in which the giver also gains something.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at some of the giving circles, particularly across the United States, and there's almost one in every town now where a group of people voluntarily come together, voluntarily pool their money together and decide on which organizations they would want to give their money to as well as volunteer with. So it's a combination of money as well as volunteering. You see that these folks can tell you about how that experience transforms them. It's giving is not just a transaction. They gain incredible relationships. They meet people from other walks of life. They make friends with other volunteers, with other donors, with clients. Some of the most amazing stories I've ever come across are relationships between donors/volunteers and some of the kids that they mentor, and how these relationships become friendships. And it's now 10 years later, and they're still, hang out and go to dinner once a month on Saturday night. And
that's sweet.
It's really incredible,
Yeah.
The capacity for giving to create community and communities to support giving.
A very healthy way to go about living one's life. Tell us about your website, the kind of information that people are going to find there, and maybe a few tips on how they can best navigate it for their own means.
The website is greatnonprofits.org. We're a nonprofit ourselves. You'll see when you go to the site, nonprofits nearest you, and then within that you could search for an issue that you care most about. And I really encourage folks to use it as a starting place, but not as the final destination. Please do go out there and visit the nonprofit, go attend a community event that they might be putting on, sign up to volunteer, get involved. It's really when you get involved that you see and you feel firsthand the impact of the organization.
Well, Perla Ni, founder and CEO of Great Nonprofits, I want to thank you so much for being here this evening. You are doing a great service for both donors and nonprofits, and I hope more and more people will use this information to make better and wiser decisions. It was a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The Business of Giving can be heard every Sunday evening between 6 and 7 p.m. Eastern on AM 970 The Answer in New York and on iHeartRadio. You can follow us at Biz of Give on Twitter and at Facebook.com/businessofgiving.